Hello everybody, Ohayo gozaimasu. Happy March 8th, happy Women's Day, International Women's Day. Thank you very much for coming out today for our service. To begin, if you'll please put your hands together in Gasho, we're going to have a minute of silent meditation. Namo Amida Betsuin, Namo Amida Betsuin, Namo Amida Betsuin. Okay, if you'll now turn to page 20 in your red service books, we're going to be chanting Shoshinge together. And that'll be Niju Peiji.
Hidori kofu 東西派文献先生大乗部情報召喚記事小安楽天智南行六六信行異行指導楽北年未来本願次年即入院上結の上昇領大号法大義不正論天神交差道論性異名無下法領来永州たら天神寺高専王朝大聖願こういう本願美栄光異道分上小一心金入空毒大公開金脈入大へ収集特使連携造成会即昇進尿発昇進入門の人間人図入生寺四寺要言本寺論南両天使上皇乱書菩薩来三蔵律師十条領盆書占領気楽法天神交差論中継行動因果見聖断方言栄光有他力少女心類心人万全本具新人法承知承知即礼判一心無量法平等小仏修行開封系当社結晶道南省有名浄土多数入万全自力変言宗円満徳語感染症三空三心慶音言増魔法華道義一生増悪地具全思案了解証明化全道六妙無償意大愛上三両逆悪法明見因縁大入本願大智慧行者小樹本語心表記一元総合領類大道逆三人即小発祥市場学天神公開一大行天気安妙観一切先祖終身安先人法華二道小弁流特十悪人類小部他薬剤費摂取中本能証言水風見大義無限上昇化本次元空妙無教連民全幕本部に新宗教書
Okay, please rise if you are able for Vandana Ti-Sarana on page 17 and the three treasures on page 18. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa buddham saranam gacchami dhammam saranam gacchami sangham saranam gacchami. Difficult is it to receive life in human form. Now we are living it. Difficult is it to hear the Buddha Dharma. Now we hear it. If we do not receive awakening in the present life, then in what life can we hope to receive it? Let us reverently take refuge in the three treasures of the truth. I take refuge in the Buddha. May we, together as one, begin on the great path of enlightenment, holding in our hearts supreme aspiration. I take refuge in the Dharma. May we, together as one, enter the storehouse of the Dharma and attain true wisdom as deep as the ocean. I take refuge in the Sangha. May we, together as one, uniting in harmony, strive to live for the enlightenment of all beings. The incomparable, deep, and profound Dharma is difficult to encounter, even through countless ages of kalpas. Now we are privileged to hear and receive it. Let us endeavor to thoroughly understand the true meaning of the Buddha Dharma. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you. Please be seated. Now, I'm ashamed to admit that I only remember that today is International Women's Day because every week I go buy the flowers. So I went yesterday to the floral shop and I said, hey, get some flowers for Women's Day. I said, I should probably talk about that. And so Women's Day is something that, of course, like we say for Mother's Day, like we say for Father's Day, hey, why is there just one day when we're thinking about the rights and accomplishments of women? It seems kind of inadequate for, half of the world population to be remembered that way. But I think the roots of the International Women's Day are really, really interesting. It comes about, you have the women's suffrage movement in the 19th century, early 20th century. Women didn't have the right to vote here in America and in many places. They weren't allowed to own property, to get divorced. Abortion rights were certainly not there. And so there was a lot of movement towards the end of, the beginnings of the industrial age. Women were working in factories. They were starting to leave the home. They were asking to get an education. They're looking for the same opportunities that their male counterparts were able to have. And so the beginnings of Women's Day, the first one was February 28th, and it was celebrated in New York by a group of socialist and feminist women's groups that had come together to ask for equal pay, equal rights. And, this would spread through Europe, and that the movements that women had started in Russia, in Tsarist Russia, were one of the inciting incidents that caused the Russian Revolution. They were protesting in favor of, better wages and things like that, and the local troops were firing on and were charging at these women, but they were able to turn the soldiers to the side of the women, and that would be kind of the genesis of the revolution of 1917. And so, because it originally started as a socialist holiday kind of celebrated for working women, It was only until 1975 when it was adopted by the UN as International Women's Day. We had the whole Cold War thing that happened. But, what does that mean for us as Buddhists? Well, you see, in the original Sangha, of course, there's women very closely involved with the story of Shakyamuni Buddha. The Buddha's mother is very important. The Buddha's stepmother, it's Maha Prajapati Gautami, is also very important to his story. But as Patty Nakai said, she has a wonderful talk about women and Buddhism. In the story of Buddha, the women tend to get kind of underserved. The Buddha leaves his wife and child behind to become a monk. It's the story of his enlightenment and his journey, but the women are kind of pushed off to the side oftentimes in Buddhist history. But, she talks about this very interesting story about, after the Buddha comes back to the Shaka clan, comes back to his family, he talks to them and they're so inspired that his stepmom, the woman who raised him, who took care of him through his, young life, wanted to become ordained and become a itinerant monk just like he was. She's so inspired. And, he says, no. This is somebody who grew up as a prince in this, ancient India. The idea of a woman becoming like a monk, a woman renouncing her home and becoming homeless was unheard of. And so, she had a very large group of friends and followers herself. Women who also wanted to become nuns. And so, he's like, oh, well, women can't be serious about this. Women have got all these different worldly concerns. They have to take care of the home. They have to take care of the family. They can't go and they can't leave to become nuns. But to prove that she was serious, she and her group, they all shaved their head. She went to ask the Buddha again. He said no. And so 3 times she asked to become a nun, to gain ordination, and he said no. This is, people probably were not told no by the Buddha that many times, but this is a very strong woman with a desire to enter the Buddhist path, to be able to practice like any of the men in ancient India could. And so, they gave up their fine robes and they put on the robes of the monks. They left their homes and they followed the Buddha from place to place. And she said, I wish to become a nun. And so, he shut her down so many times, the woman who raised him even. But it's only after Ananda, his cousin, says, is it not true that a man or a woman can become a Buddha, can become enlightened? If that's so, what are we doing here? And so eventually the Buddha has to, you don't really think of the Buddha making a mistake or a Buddha having to have his mind changed, but this was a time when the Buddha had to have his mind changed. And so in the end, he did relent. He did allow the Shaka women to become nuns. Even still, they put all these additional rules that they had to be subordinate to the male monks and things like that. So, it still had a long way to go. Because the Buddha and the people who would follow, they're still working within the framework of these societies that were very male-dominated. Even through Shinran's time, no women were allowed to enter into Mount Hiei, where he had grown up since age 9. In fact, there's a famous story about, I think it's a little bit before he leaves Mount Hiei forever, is that a woman comes and she desires to enter the monastery, and he has to turn her down. And it was thinking about, who's Buddhism for anyway? That would be one of the things that would eventually cause him to say, listen, I gotta get out of here. I gotta find a different way. And you go up from growing up in this totally male-dominated monastery where women are not able to enter, and even, many temples in Japan, women were not even allowed to enter at all, not even as practitioners. And so, this is the framework that Shinran's growing up in, but he leaves a monastery and he comes to Honen Shonin Sangha. He's on the bottom right there for our 7 Pure Land Masters. It used to be called the 7 Pure Land Patriarchs, which that's no good. We decided not to do that anymore, and I think that's good. But it's that in Honen's group, it's not an all-male group of monks or anything like that. They were ministers or, priests and lay people all studying together that, whether you were high-born or low-born, everybody was all listening together. And this teaching of the Nembutsu, this saying the name of the Buddha, was something that was not limited to men or women or whether you could become ordained or not. And so this must have been like a huge shock to his system. I mean, just seeing like women probably for the first time since he was 9 years old. And Shinran himself would kind of become an oddity in that he would become married. He would consider himself to be not a priest or layman, and that in fact, it would be after his death, it would be his youngest daughter, the one who would take care of him through his old age in Kyoto. She would be the one that would build the mausoleum for her father, the mausoleum that would grow into the Hongwanji that we know today. So, Kakushini, even though we don't talk about her as much as we should, is absolutely the reason why we have a Higashi Hongwanji, why we have a Hompa Hongwanji, right now. She kept the fire alive of Shinran's teachings. And so, through the time of Renyo, there were these prejudices, and that, Renyo's letters, Renyo's ofumi, are kind of unique in that there's a lot of letters that are about the liberation, about the awakening of women. Shinran wrote a little bit about that, but Renyo specifically had a concern about whether women would be able to go to the Pure Land, would be able to say the Nembutsu. It's something that, he wrote to a lot of women's groups. He was very concerned about this subject, and people say it's because at a very young age, his mother was not the official wife of, his father, the abbot of the Hongwanji. It was like a maid, a servant, who was forced to leave because his stepmother or his father's wife wanted her own son to take over the Hongwanji. So he grew up not knowing what happened to her. Even many years later, he could never find her. And I think it's that absence of his mother. Her last wish is said to have been that she wanted him to restore the Hongwanji, and that would be an animating force behind Renyo's revitalization of Jodo Shinshu in the under his watch. But at the time, it was thought that in addition to the 5 obstacles to enlightenment, talking about sensual desire, ill will, sloth, laziness, restlessness, and worry, doubt, something that, of course, all of us are still struggling with nowadays. In Buddhism at the time, it was believed that women had an additional 3 additional hindrances towards enlightenment, that they would have to be obedient to their family, to their parents, to their husband, and then to their son. In all these different phases of their life, they'd have to be under the care or, under the authority of a male figure. And that, so many forms of Buddhism had shut out women for that prejudice. You can't enter a temple, you can't study with us. But Renyo was talking about the vows of Amida, the 18th vow. There's no stipulation on gender in the in the vow that says, if you say Amida's name, if you think about Amida Buddha and entrust in the Nembutsu, you have to be a man or you have to be a woman. And that Amida alone would be able to overcome any hindrances or any karmic burdens that women and men carried. And that for his time, this would have been a pretty progressive thing to be thinking about. And I think when we're talking about the 48 vows, it's also important to look at the 35th vow. This is one of the vows that Hozo Bosatsu makes in order to become Amida. These are vows that are said to have been accomplished. The 35th vow says, when I attain Buddhahood, the women throughout the countless and inconceivable Buddha worlds in the 10 quarters, having heard my name, will rejoice in entrusting heart, awaken the mind aspiring for enlightenment, and wish to renounce the state of being women. If, after the end of their lives, they should be reborn as women, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment. Now, for many years in Pure Land Buddhism, this was used as a cudgel against women who were saying, well, hey, the Amida, the Dharmakara says that women can only enter the Pure Land if they become males. And, at the end of our life, we'll become male and beautiful and golden, and then we enter the Pure Land. So just wait for the next life. But the contemporary interpretation of this is that, this is expedient means talking about that in the Pure Land, the stuff that we use to separate ourselves from one another, race, gender, appearance, all these things that we judge, and we have all these hang-ups in this life. In the Pure Land, those do not exist. It's just like, it's not saying that, men are better or women are better or anything like that. What this is saying in that, ancient Buddhist way is that if you become enlightened, if you are a person of Shinjin, you start to realize that so many of these differences between us are imposed by history, they're imposed by society. They're things that, without realizing it, just like tofu sitting in a miso soup, we're absorbing all these attitudes towards people, attitudes towards other cultures, other genders, other ways of living. And that the Nembutsu, like living with true and trusting in the Buddha's power of salvation, the power of liberation, is pulling us beyond those human limited ways of seeing the world. But of course, we don't live in the Pure Land exactly. We're like a little fish that can jump out of the sea of ignorance, and just for a moment we can see the shining beauty of the sky. We can see the teachings working in our life. But we have to return to this world where we do have prejudice and the rights of people are not equal. When I was growing up in the 1980s and 90s, it was we've solved racism, we've solved sexism. We've got women CEOs and prime ministers and all kinds of things like that. What more could people want? But I think what the women who started Women's Day all the way back would remind us is that these things have to be fought for, because we can't help but to fall into old ways of thinking, even in Buddhism. There's a lot of temple fathers that we remember, a lot of male teachers that are remembered, but there are so many women that are unheard and unseen in the history of our temples, even up to the present day. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention like Reverend Miyoshi or Reverend Osa, these pioneering women who came from Japan to live overseas and to teach Buddhism here. I would not be here without their guidance, without learning from them. And that, it's unfortunate that there still is so much sexism in the world. There still are a lot of rights that are being rolled back right now. There's a lot of conflicts around the world that are, making it difficult for women to live. And I think what Shinran and all these teachers, even though they were living with the limitations of their own era, they were asking us to be fighting together, to be seeing each other as human beings, not just women or men. To understand the history of what women have gone through, the women who helped build this temple and keep it running. And so, in the Kyogyo Shinsho, Shinran writes, in reflecting on the ocean of great Shinjin, I realized that there's no discrimination between noble and humble, or black-robed monks and white-clothed laity, no differentiation between man and women, old and young. The amount of evil one has committed is not considered. The duration of any performance of religious practices is of no concern. It is simply Shinjin that is inconceivable, inexplicable, and indescribable. It is like the medicine that eradicates all poisons. The medicine of the Tathagata's vow destroys the poisons of our wisdom and foolishness. And so, I hope that on this Women's Day today, we can celebrate the women in our lives, the women who made it possible for us to be here, to uplift the next generation of women, and have a very happy Women's Day. Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Namo Amida. Okay, so coming up after this, we're going to have omigaki. So men and women together, we're going to be cleaning our temple ornaments together. Thank you very much for helping. And after that, we're going to have some pizza for lunch, some pizza, sandwiches, and salad. Coming up this next week, we're going to have on the 15th will be our Ohigan service. So we're going to have Charlene Nakamoto, our female minister from Kanyohei Higashi Hongwanji. She's going to be leading the discussion. We want to hear from the members about the temple. What stuff has been working, what stuff we can be doing better. Every few years, and probably more often than not, we have to have a discussion about how we can continue to adapt the temple, adapt Shin Buddhism to the current time. There's Buddhism, it always is adapting and changing to the society, to the culture that it resides in. And so I think it's important for us to have that conversation with the members. We're going to have like a group activity where we split up into groups. We'll be doing some diagramming and things like that. So, I hope you'll please join us for that discussion. And so we're going to be using that for our future plans for how we want to structure activities and have classes and things like that at our temples. And so, let's see, we're going to have our movie night. That's going to be happening on the 25th, on Tuesday. So I hope you'll come out for that. That'll be 5:30. We're going to be watching Akira Kurosawa's High and Low. And since it takes place in the post-war era, we're going to be having a post-war Japanese classic, the beef hayashi rice. And on the 28th, on Saturday, we're going to have our Shinran Shonin Memorial Service at 10 a.m. And we're also going to have our Sunday service on the 29th as well. So actually, I'm going to be gone between the 26th and the 31st. So if you need me for anything, please see me before then. I'm going to be visiting my family back in Los Angeles. Are there any more announcements?
Shoshinge class on 14th and 28th.
Okay, 14th and 28th for the Shoshinge class. So the class on the 28th will be after our Shinran Shonin Memorial Service. So if there's no more announcements, if you'll please rise and turn to page 112 for Ondokusan. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you so much for coming to our service today, and please join us in the conference room. We're going to get started with a polishing in just a moment, and thank you once again. Take care.